Pandemic. By A.S. Geek 2012. Chapter 45. Doubt and Resolve. Before she left, Laura suggested that if they give us a choice of where to go, we should go a few miles north of town, closer to Green Mountain, said Emma. Did she say why? Asked Kelly. We're in a sort of valley here, said Joan. It will be easier for us Pegasi to keep rain clouds contained, at least until we're more proficient at this. There's also a lake near Green Mountain, Emma explained. It will be a good source of water from evaporation. Won't we have to worry about it running out? Asked Kelly. Not really. There are lots of ways to tap moisture from the atmosphere. We just want to start small until we get better at this. Laura thinks once we actually get into the open skies, we'll start to better sense the overall flow of air and moisture across the Front Range. What about seeds to start crops? I've got that covered, said Chris. I started buying agricultural supplies in anticipation of spring. I've got some seed stores. Won't it take time for them to grow? Kelly asked. Joan's husband waved a hoof. Earth ponies got this. There's still plenty of native plants and flowers we can eat in the interim. I think we can hasten that along at least. Laura mentioned we should be thinking of the other towns nearby, said Joan. Of course, said Chris. Ponies never hoard. Fred narrowed his eyes. Despite the peaceful nature of the ponies around him, he couldn't help but be reminded of his days in Afghanistan. His missions were often to contain or push back the enemy. He wasn't about to be asked to convince the Taliban to change their deeply held religious or social convictions. That was what he felt he was up against here. Not just supplies, though, said Emma. Laura thought a contingent of Pegasi should fly to towns like Breckenridge and see how they're doing. That's a great idea, said Emma's father. Let them know that they're not alone in this. Fred also noted how Laura was still seen as their tacit leader even in her absence. While he had not wanted to compete against her, he had hoped her departure would have left a power vacuum that he could fill. Much of their planning simply made sense. He certainly didn't want to be a burden, and he imagined the others didn't, either. Planning a self-sustaining community was really a no-brainer. He wanted to think they would figure this out without a shared vision. I had heard that some humans were being hostile towards ponies, said Kelly in a nervous voice. Wouldn't flying everywhere open you up to attack? We're going to have to take some chances, said Chris. Ponies always help other ponies. I know, I just wouldn't want to lose any of my friends. I don't think we need to worry as much about that. I feel that we'll be protected. Fred's forehoof shot up. Whoa, wait. Protected by who? Chris turned to him and smiled. By God. And just where did God show up in all this? I felt it was implied by the vision, said Chris. Fred frowned. That white mare was no God. No, but I took her to be an incarnation of the Virgin Mary. Fred had never been particularly religious himself, but he had educated himself about religious faith due to the diversity of people he might encounter when he was still with Special Forces. You're Catholic, right? Yes, that's right, said Chris. Fred looked around. Any other Catholics here? Joan and her husband tentatively raised their hooves. More like lapsed Catholics, though, said Joan. We don't go to church as often as maybe we should. But we've always seen Chris there when we did, said her husband. Did either of you see that creature as Mary? Fred asked. Joan averted her eyes briefly. Well, not really, but I could see why some might. Fred turned to the others. Do any of you feel funny about Chris' interpretation? I don't, said Emma. I'm not all that religious myself, but I don't see why I should be upset that Chris wants to interpret it that way. Other ponies nodded their heads in agreement. Fred pointed a hoof at Chris. And how do you feel about others not seeing that creature as Mary? I'm not sure what you're getting at, said Chris. Does it bother you any? Why should it? They have different beliefs than I do. It shouldn't change what we're doing or how I feel. There are no barriers to friendship. I'm afraid I have to echo Chris's confusion, said Emma's father. Just what are you getting at, Fred? Fred was desperate to latch onto anything that would shatter the perception of some benevolent spirit setting them on the road to Pony Utopia while at the same time avoiding disrupting their plans to meet the new challenges arising from their transformation. He was afraid that telling them the truth behind the vision would again paint him as crazy in the head. He certainly didn't want every pony at each other's throats over their religion's convictions. If anything, this reaction should be a breath of fresh air. He had seen enough religion-inspired violence to last him a lifetime. Fred glanced back to Joan. She and her husband were speaking quietly but urgently to one another. It all comes back to what I was saying before, said Fred. I'm trying to distinguish between the message and the messenger. Did the message of the vision make sense? From a practical standpoint, yes. But the messenger may have her own agenda. Maybe if that creature hadn't appeared, and we were left to draw our own conclusions, I'd feel better about it. Instead, I feel like she was there to make sure we had only one interpretation, hers. But what if that is the right interpretation? Emma asked. Define right, said Fred. Emma hesitated. Well, what other interpretation is there? We have these abilities, we know we're going to have to help each other to survive, so doesn't it make sense to follow her? Fred raised an eyebrow. Follow her? This creature is your leader now. Emma's ears drew back slightly. I didn't quite mean it that way. I meant more follow what she said and showed us. Okay, let's come back to something you said before. You said you didn't mind Chris seeing the creature as the Virgin Mary. Emma nodded. Yes. It's what Chris said, there's no barriers to friendship. And yet you're arguing with me about the interpretation of the vision, as if there is one true way to interpret it. Isn't that a bit of a contradiction? When Emma gave him a distressed look, her father wrapped a foreleg around her barrel and said, with all due respect, Fred, why are you trying to shoot down this vision? I'm not, actually, said Fred. I'd absolutely love a world of peace and friendship. When we finally get turned loose, I'm going to be standing with the rest of you to make this work. What I'm getting at is this, I would much rather you all looked at the aspects of the vision and decide just purely on their merits whether you take them to heart or not, and not because some pony came along at the end and said, oh, by the way, this means kindness, this means generosity and so on. The other ponies glanced at each other with expressions ranging from outright confusion to genuine thoughtfulness. Joan nodded to her husband before stepping towards Fred. We think we see what you're getting at, Fred. The truth is, when Chris mentioned his take on it, we did start to wonder if maybe he was right, and this was some way of calling us back into the fold. The church would always welcome you back, said Chris gently. Yes, I know, but we had our reasons for lapsing, and those really haven't changed. I'm very grateful for your understanding, and I guess that's one reason why I want to believe in this vision. It lets my husband and I decide for ourselves what we really believe in terms of God without being judged. You just made my point for me, Fred said. You looked at part of that vision and said, hey, this works for me, I'm going for it. I'm the last pony who would ever advocate fighting over beliefs, but at the same time, I don't think any pony should tell you what to believe. I guess I still don't quite understand, said Emma. But I think you really do care about the rest of us. I really struggle now to see you as a lot of ponies thought of you before all this started. In that simple statement, Fred realized that this was a struggle for him as well. He had been granted what had been denied to him for so long, a network of friends who seemed to really care about him. He talked about separating the message from the messenger, but when that messenger was some pony who had sent him through hell for the past 20 years, it was difficult not to want to find a reason to reject the message outright. Thank you, Emma, Fred said softly. I really appreciate that. I'm afraid I'm not going to waver in what I believe, Fred, said Chris. But I'm not about to impose it on others. You make a good point. I would love to have others see things as I do, but they have to choose to do so. Fred smiled. He had finally managed to make them think. Maybe they would go on to create some sort of idealistic society, but it would be because they wanted to, and not because Sunset Shimmer dictated it. Asterisk. So, I suppose it's nice having your sister back, hey. Jenny had not realized that her conversation with James had lapsed into another awkward silence until he spoke. She had to look around to see what part of the shelter they had wandered into, as she had been moving mostly on automatic. Yeah, it's nice, actually, Jenny said with all sincerity, though her voice was a bit distant. James' ears swiveled slightly. Is something wrong? Wrong? No, why? Jenny replied more by reflex than anything else. Something's off about your voice. Are you and Laura still having issues? Things have never been better between us, said Jenny. Whatever the hell happened when I was little doesn't seem to be bothering her anymore. James tilted his head. What do you mean whatever the hell happened? I thought you agreed it was a storm that you just don't remember. Jenny sighed. I'm not sure I really want to get into this. Come on, you've started to open up to me in the last day or so, said James. Don't shut down now. Jenny gazed at James, her eyes glistening slightly. Okay, I'll tell you, but I want you to treat this seriously. James' ears rose. Why wouldn't I? Because it's going to sound like my fantasies again. It's not. I don't know what it is. It's really bothering you, though. Jenny realized that trying to keep any sort of emotional issue from a fellow pony was next to impossible. Too many cues betrayed her feelings, everything from the movement of her ears to even her scent. Perhaps that was why she was loath to return to Laura despite enjoying their better relationship. She didn't want Laura to pick up on it and get the wrong idea. I had a dream the night before, said Jenny in a low voice. Just before I woke up fully a pony. You hadn't mentioned that to me before, James said delicately. You almost always recounted dreams to me that. Jenny stopped and whirled around to face him. That's what I meant about taking me seriously. You were going to mention about how I used my dreams in my fantasies, weren't you? James rubbed a hoof through his mane. Yeah, but it was just a comment, that's all. Why are you so on edge? Jenny stomped a forehoof. I'm not. James glanced down at the hoof, then back at Jenny's face and smirked faintly. All right, maybe I am a little, said Jenny in a more contrite voice. I have no idea why. So what happened in this dream? James asked. Jenny hesitated. I don't remember all of it. When I first woke up, it just sort of vanished from my head. I don't know why I'm starting to remember it now. Well, no, I sorta do, but I don't know why that triggered it. James sat on his haunches and wrapped his tail around them. I think you better explain this in more detail. Jenny saw the silent invitation for what it was. She had found that sitting or laying next to another pony made the moment feel more intimate. Not necessarily in a romantic sense, as she felt the same thing when close to her father. The need to accept the invite felt almost instinctual, like she simply needed the support of another pony. She sat next to James, though she was careful not to actually press her body to his. I was the peasant girl, and I stood near a manor destroyed by a storm. She paused. That's all I remembered when I first woke up, but earlier today something happened that made me remember that the Fey Queen was in the dream. James' eyes widened. Really? That's why I was afraid you wouldn't take this seriously. It didn't feel like it was part of my fantasies. Could it be the other way around? James asked. Thinking about them provoked the dream. I haven't been thinking about them at all. We're living them, in a way. Hey. I hadn't thought about it like that. That's what I was told in the shared dream we all had, said Jenny. But then when we heard about Sunny, it made me remember the Fey Queen. Sunny. James asked. Laura's friend, you mean? Yeah. Supposedly she's the one who's behind all this. James gave her a dubious look. Are you serious? I'm not sure what to think, Jenny said. Laura was really upset at first when she heard about it, but now she seems to be over it already. She's too excited about what she can do. A lot of us are, said James. But I'm still curious about this dream. What was the Fey Queen doing? Jenny closed her eyes as she struggled to see her murky memories. She remembered saying something, but not exactly what, or what happened after that. All I can remember is that she caused the storm. She never did anything like that in your fantasies. Which is exactly why this is so confusing to me, Jenny said in an urgent voice. She never did something like that in anything I ever thought up about her. So could this just be a random dream? Jenny frowned. Well, it has to be, right? But it's weird that I forgot it, then remembered it again later. That's not how dreams work. You remember them soon as you wake up, and they fade over time unless you really focus on them. And why would hearing about Sunny trigger it? Or make me think of her as the Fey Queen? James blinked. You hadn't mentioned that last part. Jenny looked at him in confusion. What do you mean? Wait, no, I didn't. She bolted to her hooves. I had forgotten that detail, something that happened earlier today, and now I remembered it again. What the hell? James' ears had drawn back in surprise at her outburst, but now they slowly swiveled forward as he stood. You said you were excited at seeing your sister again and hearing what she could do. I know, but I don't forget details like that, said Jenny. Especially not when what Sunny supposedly did was almost exactly what the Fey Queen was doing. Something weird is going on. Are you sure it wasn't just a dream? Jenny rolled her eyes. Oh, right, like that shared vision we all had was just a dream. But that was different, wasn't it? James said in a confused voice. It was special because we all had it. Jenny was about to protest when she remembered what the mayor had said in that vision, that Jenny had already taken steps towards being a better pony. Was all this focus on her odd dream just another manifestation of her self-centered attitudes? Was she already backsliding by making it all about herself again? It's just really odd, that's all, Jenny said in a subdued voice. Maybe I'll get over it if I don't think about it too much. Just so you know, I wasn't trying to dismiss your dream, Jenny, said James. I just don't like seeing you upset. Jenny caught movement out of the corner of her eye. Laura was demonstrating flying maneuvers to 4 other Pegasi, some of whom had only just finished transforming that morning. My sister can control the weather. That thought should be familiar to her, something that made sense. Laura was a Pegasus, so of course she could control the weather. Yet why did Jenny still have a vague idea in the back of her head that something was still off about this arrangement? Why would a dream she had initially forgotten now continue to pester her even as she watched her sister? Jenny turned her head back towards James. Thanks. I'll try not to let this bother me too much. Maybe once they finally let us out of here, things will settle down. Asterisk. I want to speak to whoever the fuck is in charge around here, Eileen protested. Ms. McDermott, everyone right now is really busy, said the flustered nurse who had tried unsuccessfully to get Eileen to submit to a blood draw. Now, please, if you would get back into bed and let me. Fuck that, and fuck your needles. Even a blind man can see I'm perfectly fine. If I haven't started going pony by now, I'm not going to ever. We don't know that yet. Well, I do, because I'm tired of being cooped up in here, said Eileen. Last I heard, I can't be held here against my will, so I'm discharging myself. There's been a change in circumstances, ma'am. Eileen raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? Unless some idiot in Washington decided to declare martial law, you. That's exactly what we're under, Ms. McDermott, said the nurse in a slightly quavering voice. Eileen stared for a long moment. You're shitting me. I wish I were. Things have gotten that bad. Eileen let out an exasperated sigh and ran a hand through her hair as she started to pace. You're telling me the whole world is going to shit? Am I going to be one of the last humans left? You'll at least have the company of the emergency zone staff, said the nurse. We've also received the counterspell. Yeah, but I thought that Purple Pony was supposed to fix everything. From what I understand, ma'am, she's still working on that. So is that why I'm being kept here? Eileen demanded. Is this some sort of bunker for what's going to be left of humanity? It's not that, said the nurse. I mean, I certainly hope it won't come to that. The truth is, there's really no place for you to go. I can go back to my sister's house. I'm supposed to be looking after it anyway. But there's no food supplies coming in except for the emergency zone staff and their patients, and we have no idea how long the electric grid can stay up in this part of the country with as many people who are sick with the flu or ETS symptoms. What about Denver? The transportation grid is still shut down. Absolutely no interstate travel allowed. The nurse paused. Plus I've heard that things have gotten really bad there. Over half the population has ETS. So what you're telling me is that this is the zombie apocalypse, but the zombies are small, colorful horses, Eileen deadpanned. I swear to God, I'm living through it and I can barely believe it. All right, how about this, can I be reunited with my son? That would be Robert McDermott. The nurse asked. Yes, he's in the same shelter with my sister and her husband. I'm not sure we can do that. Why the fuck not? Eileen demanded. I'm supposed to be cured, right? It's not like I can pick up ETS from any of them now. I realize that, ma'am, but we don't know what the situation in the shelters will be right now. There's talk of moving them or something like that. I don't know all the details. Then I want to talk to someone who does have the details. I want to see my son. You're not the only one who has loved ones desperate to see their family. The nurse exploded. Eileen flinched, her eyes widening. I have a husband and a little girl 4 states over, the nurse said in a choked voice, her eyes shimmering. I've barely talked to them in the past week because I'm pulling 15-hour shifts, and I just heard this morning that they were starting to get ETS symptoms. I have no clue if I'll get to them before they change. Eileen swallowed. Fuck, I'm sorry. The nurse took a deep breath and wiped her eyes quickly with the back of her hand. I'm just trying to tell you that a lot of us are in the same position you are, Ms. McDermott, but we have to make do until this is over. One way or another. Eileen let out a ragged sigh and ran her hand through her disheveled hair. She remembered all the promises she had made to start remaking herself when this was over. Yet now over seemed so far away that it was just a vanishing point in the unreachable distance. Perhaps that was just another delaying action, using the crisis to postpone the work she needed to do. Just like she had before, only then it was when I get a little more money or when I get a better job, things that conveniently never seemed to materialize. Eileen turned back to the nurse. Okay, how about this, if the powers that be here can declare me healthy, then put me to work doing something. The nurse blinked. I'm sorry. I don't know shit about medicine, but surely you need a warm body for something? Fuck, I'll clean toilets and bedpans if that's what you need. I just want to do something to help. What good is keeping me confined to bed in a hospital room going to do any of us? That's not a decision I can make, the nurse said in an uncertain voice. Then go find someone who can. Eileen declared. Look, if things are that bad and that busy around here, any help you can get could make a fix for this giant mess go faster, right? Eileen knew her logic was not quite solid. They needed technicians and physicians, not some loser who didn't have the sense to realize she had no business trying to raise a child. Yet this wasn't about proving to Bob or to her sister that she could be a good mother, it was about proving to herself that she could be a better person. Becoming a pony won't solve your problems. That was what Twilight had told her. She probably would have been just as lousy a pony as she had been a human. It was time to show she could be a better human. "All right, I'll see what I can do," said the nurse. "And thanks for putting up with my meltdown just now." Eileen smirked. "Hell, I wish I could be as calm as you were, especially when dealing with horrible patients like me." The nurse smiled faintly. "I'll get back to you as soon as I can." "Hey, wait, before you go," Eileen called out. "What's your name?" The nurse turned around and gave her a confused look. "Isn't it on my—" She trailed off as she looked on her uniform where her name tag should be and saw only a discolored space. "I didn't even notice it had fallen off. My name's Linda. And call me Eileen, please." Linda smiled more fully before heading out. "Maybe the world is going to go to pony hell," Eileen muttered. "But I'll be damned if I'm going to just sit on the sidelines and watch it happen." Asterisk. When Bob was upset, especially to the point where interacting with the world felt awkward, he would retreat to his room and close the door to shut out everyone else for a while until he resolved his issue or found something to distract him. As the day wore on, Bob felt he had become the embodiment of awkwardness. He could no longer stand despite having balanced fine on his hooves just that morning. Dark green fur covered his now fully equine legs and over much of his torso and arms. His hands could not really be called that anymore, but nor were they hooves yet. His horn had fully emerged, and when he thought his nose looked and felt like it jutted out further, Sarah had confirmed that he was developing a muzzle. Yet not only did he have nowhere to retreat to, he felt an aching need to be close to others. If he concentrated hard enough, he could tell himself that this was all part of the induced transformation. Hearing from Sarah that some pony had actually been identified as the culprit and taken into custody had sparked some bit of introspection. Part of his old personality still held sway, as he did not voice his needs, yet his family sensed it anyway. Some pony always remained close, Sarah more often than any pony else. Her magic replaced his useless hands, and it made him all the more eager to start using his own horn. He could have just accepted the rewiring of his brain, but he couldn't help but examine it more closely. It truly did seem like a program, with symbols and relationships that formed patterns. The term runes seemed appropriate for these symbols, and spells for the relationships between them. He couldn't keep these revelations to himself, and he expounded on them to Sarah. "So you really are casting a spell when you levitate stuff, Aunt Sarah," said Bob. "You just don't think of it that way, just like you don't think about how you walk or talk. It's just wired into your skill memory." Sarah smiled gently. She laid on her belly with her forehooves crossed, her tail swishing idly. "It still takes some practice to get good at it. You're getting better at it every hour it seems." "I certainly hope so," said Sarah in a wistful voice. Another urge nagged at Bob. "Are you going back to archaeology?" "I want to," said Sarah softly. "I really want to." Despite not quite completing his transformation, Bob had started picking up nuances in pony body language. "What's to stop you?" "I wish you had seen the same vision as every pony else," said Sarah. "It would explain things a lot more than I ever could." "But you said some pony was behind all this, that they did this deliberately to us. Wouldn't it follow that the vision came from her as well?" "It probably did," said Sarah. "And maybe that was wrong, but I still can't get over how much it spoke to me. It touched on everything I've been worried about since this started." "I can't really dispute the gist of the vision," said Bob. "Working together as a peaceful society makes sense if we're going to survive. It's just that it seemed to touch every pony personally." Sarah sighed. It did. It was easy for Bob to subsume himself to this vision by proxy. He might even see it for himself if he were fully pony by morning. His adoptive family had never been this close. Wasn't that alone worth all the initial turmoil? He raised a misshapen hand and stared at it. He wanted it to be a hoof. He wanted this to be over, but he felt like he needed to get there on his own terms, no matter how much of a struggle it was. What if that was just to make the vision stick? Sarah gave him a puzzled look. I don't understand. Like advertising, said Bob. It supposedly works better when targeted. But I still have to do something about my own faults that get in the way of us all working together, said Sarah. That did make sense to Bob. The vision as he heard it recounted through others made everything seem so simple: follow 5 tenets, and everything will turn out okay. Yet wasn't that overly simplistic? Wasn't there more to it? Failing to find fault with that, he instead turned to something that he could still examine. Your vision was given to you by some pony who's considered a criminal. I know, but you can't deny that I disrupted my family more than I should have. Because you were pursuing something that was really important to you, and that you were very good at. I really appreciate your kind words, but they're not just words. Bob paused before adding, I know you're good because I've read everything you ever wrote on archaeology, and not just after you specialized in Native Americans. Sarah stared. What? Really? Bob blushed faintly. You started your archaeology blog back when I was 6. Sarah nodded slowly. Do you remember username Displaced Son? Yes, of course I do. He was my very first follower. He still follows me. That was me, Aunt Sarah. Sarah's ears twitched, and her eyes widened. You never failed to make a comment on my posts. Every single one. Her eyes glistened. And never failed to give me words of encouragement when I felt like my theories were being shot down without a proper hearing. Your theories were radical, but they deserved to be heard, Bob said. And they were correct, Sarah said in a quavering voice. My theories were right, even if not quite in the way I had thought. And Twilight even said maybe Sunset was behind them failing to gain traction. Bob tilted his head. Twilight. Sarah shook her head quickly, never mind. I'm not sure how much I should say about that, other than she said I should be free to find my own destiny. Then why not continue your archaeological work? Bob, before I answer that, please tell me why you never said anything, said Sarah in a plaintive voice. Why didn't you ever tell me you were that interested in my work? Bob sighed. I think you know the reason. Sarah looked thoughtful for a moment. Her ears drooped slightly. You were worried how Harry would take it, because he was so focused on connecting with you more. Yes. Sarah glanced to the side, and Bob followed her gaze. Harold and Jenny sat next to one another as they discussed plans with other Earth ponies for when they were released. I don't think you need to worry about that anymore, Sarah said, a small smile playing across her muzzle. Maybe not, Bob said softly. We had a talk about it a few days ago, before he was completely pony. I think we worked it out. I'm really glad to hear that. So what about my question? Bob asked. Why not keep doing what you really liked? Sarah gave him a forlorn look. I don't want to neglect my family again. I'm sure you can work through that. Maybe even more so now, if everything we've ever found important about society is being tossed out the window. For instance, how are things like money going to matter now? Sarah remained quiet, looking thoughtful. I guess there's some selfish interest at work, too, said Bob. I can't secretly follow you from the shadows via your blog anymore. Sarah smiled. Are you really that interested in archaeology? Maybe. I don't quite know. I just want the chance to find out, and I thought going through you was the way to do it. Sarah's eyes shimmered. She stood, trotted over to Bob, and wrapped her forelegs around him in a gentle hug. I have to confess, I always wished my family was more interested in my work. I never knew I had my wish all along. Bob returned the hug as best as his still morphing body would allow. I'm sorry I never told you. I guess I was also worried about the implications that I considered you more my mother than my birth mother was. Sarah let out a heavy sigh and hugged Bob tighter. Bob closed his eyes and fought back tears. My mother missed so many opportunities. I don't want to see that happen to you. Sarah drew back from the embrace and wiped her eyes with the back of a hoof. I don't want to give up archaeology. I've put too much of my life into it. I just need to think about it for a bit. I'm not ready to make a decision yet. Sarah's words from earlier echoed now in Bob's head, I should be free to find my own destiny. Perhaps that was the missing piece. What was harmony without some sort of drive to do something you really cared about, even if it didn't contribute to this utopia vision? Surely there had to be room for that. Laura told me she was sure everything would work out in the end, Bob said. It will, said Sarah. Things are better. It's just some of the details I still need to figure out. Asterisk. Laura gazed at the group of Pegasi that had grown from only 4 to 15 in the space of only an hour. Yet in that short span of time, she had managed to get all of them flying steady and sure, and now they hovered with ease as non-Pegasi friends and family looked on in awe and pride. Sometimes she was not even aware that a new one had joined until she brought them to a stop and actually did a count. She was grateful they had trickled in. Despite her newly found confidence, she would have found it daunting had all of them shown up at once. Even now she felt just a bit nervous. She couldn't use Sunny's words to fall back on to shore her up, even though she still wanted to reject the idea that Sunny had done anything wrong. Okay, now I want to show you something else, but it's kind of hard to explain, said Laura. Weather control! Cried a very eager 12-year-old colt. His wings flapped in a blur that made a faint buzzing sound. Please tell me you're going to teach us that. Laura smiled. It's more that I want to show you how you can sense the stuff that can lead to that. You have to take it a little at a time. But didn't you create a rain cloud all by yourself? Asked a mare. And indoors? Cried a stallion. Not by myself, Laura said quickly. I had 2 very talented friends to help me, and even then we had to puzzle it out. I think I can already sense some of it. The colt said excitedly. I told my mother that it feels more humid in here today than it did yesterday, and she just looked at me funny. But it is more moist today, isn't it? Said another. I can feel it myself. I think they turned up the humidifiers since the weather's been so dry the past few days. I can't feel it, another Pegasus said in a glum voice. Neither can I, echoed another. Don't worry, said Laura. That's what I want to show you. What we found out was that you get a better sense for these things when you're moving. I think it has something to do with the air flowing over your wings. So what do we do? The colt asked. Laura turned away from them. Follow me. We're going to fly in a wide circle around the room. Just take it slow, and try to go single file. She turned her head back towards them. Ready? A sea of nodding heads was her response. Then let's go. The Pegasi easily fell into a line behind her without much jockeying for position, as if they already had an instinct for coordination with their fellow flyers. At once a technician called up to them, Miss Tanner. No making indoor rain clouds, please. We're not, I promise. Laura called back. There's not enough moisture here for one anyway. Laura, be careful, a familiar voice called up from below. Laura face-hoofed. Yes, Mom. Several Pegasi behind her giggled. Laura did as well. While we're not making a cloud, this is how you would move to create one. You concentrate the moisture in the center of your circle. I can feel it. Cried the little colt. So can I. Cried another. I couldn't before, but now I can. I didn't realize it was this simple. Marveled another. Is it moving? I think it's moving. I can feel it moving, too, like we're drawing it in. Laura had already sensed it herself, as if she had a connection not to just the flow of air but the movement of her fellow Pegasi. They weren't individual ponies each doing their own part and just happened to be very well coordinated. Something was passing through all of them, as if their magic had somehow been linked together. Now she understood how she, Emma, and Joan had pulled off their feet, some sort of unspoken communication had connected them. Yet she realized something else as well. She had them move slowly specifically so they would avoid actually trying to create a cloud, but having so many Pegasi working together was the same as a few Pegasi working more quickly. "Every pony, stop!" Laura called out, and she spun around in place. The other Pegasi complied, but not without a few disappointed noises. Laura smiled so hard, her muzzle ached. "No, it's okay. I stopped us only because we were doing this almost too well, and I promised we wouldn't make it rain," she said in an elated voice. She thrust a hoof towards the center of their flight circle. "Look, can you see it? It's kinda of wispy but I can see it." The little colt cried. "So can I." Another cried. Just faintly visible in the overhead lights of the auditorium were slowly undulating strings of wispy fog. Below, a humming noise arose as the humidifiers activated one after the other as they suddenly detected a very dry environment. Several technicians gave them disapproving looks, but no one said a word of protest. "Yes, you did," said Laura, so pleased that her voice quavered from the force of her emotions. "We did it together." As the other Pegasi looked at their work with reactions ranging from astonishment to awe, many of Laura's doubts melted away. Maybe Sunny had lied to her or done something to her against her will, but what did it matter? Laura had never felt this enthusiastic about anything in her life. This wasn't about Jenny or past sins anymore. Perhaps she had entered into this lark with the thought of becoming some sort of great storm tamer, but she finally understood that was not where her future lay. Her true talent was far more fundamental than that. Something felt within her grasp, something that would forever silence any questions of what her life path would be. It felt so close, it had a tangible force, and once it did arrive, she would know for sure. There would be a sign. Like a sort of mark. Like a cutie mark. The term had simply popped into her head. It quickly turned from alien, to familiar, to desired. It would make her feel complete. Then the question of how she got here would never matter again. The little colt suddenly buzzed up to her. "Are we gonna get a chance to make real clouds and really make it rain?" Laura smiled. "We will. I promise."